Good day, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the Risk version 4.0 video blog series, where we endeavor to explore everything about modern day risk management and what it means to be an appointed risk professional in the modern working world. In the second episode, we're going to look at the concept of the age of perpetual disruption. Now, we introduced this in the first episode, and as a bit of a recap, you'll remember that we discussed that our modern working world has two very distinct characteristics, two characteristics that we've never experienced at any other time in human history. First of all, it is systemically complex, and secondly, it is perpetually disruptive. Now, what this means for the modern risk management profession is that we're all collectively faced with a particularly ominous challenge: how to effectively control high-impact risks born from a highly interconnected world experiencing ever-increasing frequencies of change. Now, just to reinforce this point and demonstrate what the age of perpetual disruption looks like, I want to show you a storyboard that I developed. And what the storyboard does is it maps out the journey of live music. Now, I, like many other people, love listening to live music, but I wonder how many of us ever stop to think how lucky or privileged we are to be able to have live music accessible to us at any time, at any point of our choosing. Because this concept is actually a relatively new concept. I mean, up until roughly 250 years ago, for the vast majority of people living on this planet, live music simply did not exist in their day-to-day life. If you wanted to listen to any form of live music, you had to leave the house. You had to go find a bard, a minstrel band, or an orchestra. So for more than 10,000 years leading up to roughly 1880, live music simply was not accessible to most human beings. Then roughly about 1900, somebody invented the phonograph, which was a critical milestone in the journey of live music, because this led to the gramophone, the record player, and the hi-fi. And so we saw for a better part of 50 years the recorded music era existed. You would listen to music either on a cassette or an LP and eventually on a compact disc. Now, for those of us who are fortunate enough to be teenagers in the 80s, you'll remember that your entire social status revolved around the type of music you listen to and on what format you listen to. The coolest people always seem to be those that could invite their friends around to their house to come listen to their record collection. And that's how recorded music actually influenced our lives back in the 80s and so on. But eventually, we moved on from this. Sony went on to invent a revolutionary device called the Walkman, and all of a sudden music became mobile. The Walkman was the iPod of its time. It was an absolute social phenomenon. Absolutely everybody had to have one. But eventually this led on to the Discman, the digital player, the iPod, and inevitably the smartphone. So for about 30 years, mobile or digital music became the main means upon which we listen to music. But even that eventually changed, and we moved into the streaming era. Now, apologies, I realize the bubble hides the title, but what it actually says is streaming. And that's been the main method for listening to music over the past 5 years, because now we have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And it essentially means we can listen to music on the go anywhere we want to. And people aren't listening to music on LPs or on CDs anymore. In fact, if you go to some of the more advanced cities such as Tokyo or Singapore, you will find that it's difficult to actually go buy a compact disc in the mainstream shops because they're no longer being sold. It's become a niche product because everybody's listening to music on streaming devices. And this is the way that perpetual disruption works. Things that we accept as leading practice or business usual today almost certainly are going to become outdated or obsolete tomorrow, and in quicker time. So if we look at the music history, for 10,000 years or more, millions of years potentially, however far back you want to go, people couldn't listen to live music other than natural music of birds and rivers, babbling brooks and that kind of thing. Then eventually we had 50 years of recorded music, 30 years of digital mobile music, and now the last 5 years it's been streaming. And inevitably that'll get replaced by something else too, probably. All right. So what this means for the risk management profession is that the age of perpetual disruption, everything is changing. And this presents a particular problem for the risk management profession because very little has changed in the risk management profession over the last few decades. And this has to change itself because as the world changed, the risk management profession has to keep up. Now, just to reinforce the point of why this is so important, let's consider the following observation. The telephone, which incidentally was revolutionary for its time, it took 70 years to attract 100 million users. Facebook achieved that in 5 years. Candy Crush in only 3, and TikTok in less than 1. So what this means for us is that we're actually now living in a working world whereby an organization's biggest competitor a year from now could be one that doesn't even yet exist. So the term "there be dragons" comes to mind. And basically what it's telling us is that we are now living in an age of perpetual change, or as I have repeatedly said, the age of perpetual disruption. And one of the questions I like to ask practicing risk officers, particularly people in leadership positions, is is your invested risk management capability prepared? When you think how disruptive and how momentous the world is right now, how quickly everything is changing, can you look at your risk management professionals that you are employed, the people that you're invested in, and say they are up to the task? Do they have the skill sets? Do they have the understanding to actually succeed in a world that is complex, data-driven, system-driven, emergent, and potentially even chaotic? And this is the part that I want to explore as part of the video blog series. I want to look more into the skills required of the modern day risk management professional, particularly now that we are living in the age of perpetual disruption. So one of the questions that we may ask is well, is disruption purely technological? Now, the truth is that the technological disruption is the one that's most obvious. It's the one that we see almost on a day-to-day basis. The rise of smartphones, complex global data sharing systems, autonomous machinery, intelligent machines, all of that's in our face on a day-to-day basis. So technological disruption is the one we are most aware of. But it's not just technological disruption that we have to be aware of. There are other forms of disruption that are happening on an almost day-to-day basis. Political disruption. I mean, can anybody ever have foreseen 10 years ago that a personality like Donald Trump would have been elected to the most powerful leadership position in the world? Now, regardless of what your personal views may be of the man, the fact is he was highly disruptive. He was a disruptive choice. But there are other things happening in our working world right now that we've seen in the last few years. The rise of the Arab Spring, Brexit, these are all massive political disruptions that we have seen across the world that is changing the way we view politics. Equally, we're experiencing mass social disruption. Just look at the campaigns that have come through in the last 5 years alone. The hashtag #MeToo movement that sweeps across the world. Currently, it's the Black Lives Matter movement. For a better part of a decade, gender equality. Coronavirus is another massive social disruptor. The modern gay rights movement. All of these things are disrupting the way we see the world, the way we do things, the way we think. So modern disruption is not just about technology. It's also about political views and social views. And all of these things that you're seeing on your screen right now are all happening at the same time. I mean, 10 years ago, could you have fathomed that this many disruptive forces would be changing and reshaping the way we see the world and the way we act and the way we behave? So one of the questions we may now ask is that how is it that we're experiencing so much disruption this often? How has the world got so disruptive so quickly? And in order to understand that question, we have to look towards understanding the evolution of our modern working world. In particular, we need to start looking towards the concept of the fourth industrial revolution. Now, hopefully by now, most of you have heard of this and you're aware of it. Up until 2019, pretty much pre-COVID, this was the big talking point in all management circles and academic circles. The world is shifting to Industry 4.0, a fourth version of our working world, and as a result, everything else has to shift accordingly. Unfortunately, coronavirus had a tendency to hijack the conversation in the last year. So this has taken a bit of a backseat and got delegated to Agenda B. I want to bring it back to the forefront because I believe the fourth industrial revolution has more staying power than the coronavirus, and it's going to live with us for longer. So we need to start talking about this and start responding to it proactively once again. So for those of you who aren't aware of the fourth industrial revolution, I'm going to go into a lot more detail about this in the next episode, episode 3, but just as a quick overview, we're now transitioning into a fourth version of our working world, Industry 4.0 as it's been called. And as a result, Industry 4.0 is going to need suitably aligned management functions to support it. For example, a leadership 4.0, a workforce 4.0, supply chain 4.0, project management 4.0, and of course risk Management 4.0. And if you haven't guessed it already, this is why I've named this video blog series Risk 4.0, because I want to talk about what the fourth version of risk management needs to look like. All right, a version of risk management that can exist during Industry 4.0 and can leverage all the wonders of smart technologies, complex systems, intelligent machinery, and all the other wondrous things that are coming out. So the reason I started this blog is to start talking about the direction that risk management needs to move, because unfortunately, as I've said before, I feel risk management has got a little bit too static and too stale in recent years. The way we are managing risk at the moment is not that different to how we were doing it 10 years ago or 20 years ago. In fact, if you were to be honest with yourself, when was the last time we saw anything truly innovative or disruptive come through the risk management profession? And this is something we need to start thinking about, because the only way the risk management profession is going to survive in future years, particularly during an Industry 4.0, is if we upskill and innovate, not if we just stay static and do what we've always done. So having said that, I want to introduce you to our next episode. Please join us next week if you've enjoyed this one, where we will go into a little bit more detail about the fourth industrial revolution and specifically how it's going to shape a future version of risk management. In other words, risk management version 4.0. So thank you for attending today. I hope you enjoyed this. As always, provide your feedback through the normal channels and look out for the next episode in roughly a week or two. And until then, have a good time.